Testing, ITALK Committee, September 11th, 2019.
Well, why don't we go ahead and, let's see, we're not too early, but, okay. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order.
Yes.
Welcome, everybody. Let's see, first item on the agenda, approval of minutes from our July 10th meeting. Any comments on the minutes?
I have read them. I would move approval. Second.
Second, anybody with any other comments, thoughts? All right, all in favor? All right, do we have any public speaker slips at the moment? No. Any items from communications and members that aren't on the agenda? That is not on the agenda, do we have any
Nope. We know if Cassandra's going to stop by?
He is. He will be here.
All right. Let's see how he's doing.
All right, so hearing none, I guess we're through item 2. The next item on the agenda is the consent. I'm going to shut this door if you don't mind. Sorry.
Yes.
As I get older, I have a harder time with background noise, and so it's my issue more than others maybe. But
Don't date yourself.
yeah. All right. Let's skip item 3 for the moment and go to the consent agenda. There's a handful of items, number 4 through 9 on the consent. Anybody on the committee have anything they want to discuss from the consent agenda? Okay, do we need to, there's nothing here that we need to.
All information.
That's correct?
Right. All information. So no vote
Okay,
necessary.
all right. So let's move on. Item 10 is the actions by the committee and board. Do you want to
Yes, I'm happy to.
highlight?
I think we mentioned at your last meeting that the board had requested an overview of the big 5 moves, and that presentation was provided. And as part of that, the board directed staff to develop a regional plan that conforms to federal and state laws, including state greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, provides realistic and transparent revenue assumptions, and utilizes the 5 big moves, including highway and transit improvements, and prioritizes all county corridors, including state routes 78, 52, 67, and the 94, 125. And you're going to hear more about that during today's meeting. And then last Friday, the board also heard, related to that item, the proposed FY20 program budget amendment for the CIP, which again you'll hear about at today's meeting. The board approved the memorandum of agreement with the City of Imperial Beach to use our commercial paper program. They approved amendment number 5 to the RTIP. They approved time extensions for completion of smart growth and active transportation funded climate action plans in the cities of Lemon Grove and Santee. You'll recall that you heard about the RTIP delegation for admin modifications, and the board went ahead and approved that as well. And then they also heard an update on the Transnet program, which is on your agenda for today.
Any questions or follow-up on committee and board actions?
Well, I'm curious, is this handout going to be something that is addressed
Yes,
with?
so there's
I'll cover that as
two-
part of
yeah.
item
Got it, okay.
13.
So the
There's
2
2
items.
handouts. Yeah, 2 handouts. One is a letter from the City of Carlsbad, which belongs with item under your consent agenda, item 9, sorry, for your quarterly financial reports. And that is the letter that you typically receive when a local jurisdiction is not meeting the 75% threshold regarding their spending for Transnet. And it just kind of tells you what they're planning on spending their Transnet funds on. And then the other letter is related to Jose's item, which item number 13.
So the Carlsbad letter was kind of clean
Yeah,
up
I came in a little
what
late,
was
so it didn't get posted.
missing or late from the item we already heard last month.
That's right.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for Ariana on the her update?
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome, Hassan.
Good morning, thank you.
Morning. We've skipped through the consent agenda, and we can, if you're ready, we can go back up to item 3, which is your report.
So thank you. So you're gonna have a dual presenters today, myself and Jose. Good morning to all of you. Good to see you. Haven't seen you for a while. We have quite a few updates for you. One is to the regional transportation plan. As you know, our board in July took action to move the 5 big moves forward. The team here has been working really hard to put the details that were missing. I don't know whether you visited or not. The Vigil Lab is open on the 20th floor. I hope you'll have some time to go by and visit. You will be pleased with the progress that the team is making. I was pleasantly surprised of how fast things are going. So we're still on schedule to have a framework with the cost information, with some benefit information in November. Very significant discussion in the region we're having with different groups. Yesterday we went to the UTC, I think it's EDC group. This is, I call them the most powerful retired people in California. And it was really, unfortunately I didn't have enough time. I had to travel to an interview, but there were a lot of questions. And they pushed back on something, and they appreciated others. So if you're in the car business, you don't want to hear anything about transit, and if you're in other businesses, you want to say, okay. So, but what was interesting for me from this group, which is a powerful group, is the desire for this region to figure it out, to figure that balanced transportation system, and I believe we're going to figure it out, and it's going to be a balanced system, and it's going to meet the requirement and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I was really pleasantly surprised of how many of the individuals yesterday emphasized that, and especially those who live near the ocean, that they're concerned about, the sea level rise and the warming and all of that thing. So, but we're going around the region. We completed all the cities yesterday. The last was Chula Vista. We spoke to all the city councils. We're very pleased with the amount of outreach that we're doing, but we are still the same thing. If you, depending which channel you open, you get a perspective. Today we're going to share with you that I think we didn't, if you could put the slide for the Transnet, we didn't talk to you about, but this is big for me because the truth and getting it right is important. And do we have that slide, the Transnet?
With the presentation?
Yeah.
So you put item 12?
So, a lot been made about Transnet. And as you know, I'm a firm believer that if the public deserves to know the right information about the resources that the public agencies have. And you're the committee that can hold oversight. You have the right to know and ask questions about this. So I think I'm pleased to say that we put that question to bed. How much money do we have? What will that do?
Which slide did you want?
The first one. Yeah, this one. So, remember, we're talking here about major corridors, the 38%. The 62% is pretty much the local, the transit, its formula goes out. So this is the 38% that's supposed to build the corridors. If you go to the next slide, yeah, there. Between now and 2048,
Relinquished as your.
between now and 2048, we're going to generate $6 billion expenditure yield dollars. But also between now and 2048, we're going to pay $3.7 billion of debt services, pay the credit card. Remaining net between now and 2048, $2.3 billion expenditure yield dollars. Today's dollar, that's about $1.4 billion. That's the total is going to be available between now and 2048 to build the project. By the way, over 80% of this is going to come after 2030 with the credit card payment and more. So when people talk about, where's my money, there is no money. There is little money which we're using wisely, and we're going to talk to you about today how we're using it. So this discussion is raging on, but at least this question has been answered. Both Jose and I spoke to the board several times. Go to the next slide. And if you take the 14 projects, the list of the 14 projects, and their cost, we're about $15.8 billion short. If you take the last year's matching fund to the state.
That's still the major corridors.
That's major corridor. I will take responsibility as the leader of this agency that we overpromised in this program. A forecast is a forecast. It wasn't intentional, but we did overpromise. And we have to live with the fact that this is the way it is. That is the truth.
Is it an overpromise of just the costs have gone up so much, or is it just
the forecast
pure
plus
miss?
the cost? It's both. We forecasted more than we thought we're gonna have. We started with a forecast of $14 billion in 2002 when actually we're gonna get 9 or 8. What's the number? 8 to 9. But also the cost went up significantly, and the combination of both made us over forecast. But I promise you that, and we are definitely going to go for other measures, and hopefully we're going to be successful. You're going to see as close to our science as possible when it comes to these kind of things. The worst thing you could do is overpromise. The best thing you could do is say, oh yeah, I find more money. That's nice, right? So that will not happen in the future. But the bottom line is we have some resources left, some Transnet and federal. And these resources are going to be used wisely, especially between now and 2030. We are going to spend a lot of money clearing projects and making them really shovel-ready, so we can compete for federal and state. And then we're going to get into and Jose is going to talk a little bit more detail on that program we were doing. So that's on the RTP. On the airport subcommittee, I'm happy to report to you that subcommittee concluded its work. Their final meeting will be the 25th of this month. They have 4 alternatives to evaluate. The NABWAR, an underground people mover to the airport, a NABWAR, an above ground people mover to the airport through the car facilities, the ITC, the Intermodal Transportation Center, with people mover to the airport, and then connecting the trolley from Santa Fe to the airport. These 4 alternatives were evaluated, and the subcommittee will hear them on the 25th. A recommendation to the board will be on the 27th. I can share with you that definitely the now board with underground people mover is superior in terms of the analysis we did. But all of them have to be considered when we do the environmental impact report. As you heard in the news, we signed an unbinding MOU with the Navy, which we were very pleased about. We also heard that the airport committed $500 million to transportation alternative. And you're going to hear a great deal of news this month in progress moving this forward. I always believe that this is the greatest opportunity for the San Diego region to do not only transportation but economic development. I still believe that. I think if we didn't do it, it would be the biggest missed opportunity ever. So I'm hopeful that the leadership is going to be there. Part of the request that Jose is going to talk about shortly is we're asking the board for $50 million for pre-development to move this forward, subject to the agreements with the Navy. So that's on the subcommittee. And finally, we went to the board last Friday, for a 6-hour meeting to talk about regional housing need assessment, which moved forward, but mainly to talk about programming of $600 million between now and 2025. We have $600 million, 130 of which are Transnet, and the rest 470 is federal and state. We're programming this money now because this will be the last chance for us to program money under the existing plan. This plan expires in December 4th of this year. And if we don't do a tip now, we have to wait until either the next plan is in or our bill is signed by the governor and the federal update is done in May. So we kind of have, this is our last chance to do it. One of the reasons I was late is our bill is being heard on the Senate floor today. And it's a critical bill, that Bill 1730, that will give us 2 years without any penalties to do our plan. The $600 million proposal, which did you distribute the list? We're going to distribute it?
Yeah, that's part of their package.
Okay.
Yes.
You have the list. We try to do 2 things. One is move the board action of July 12th. But most importantly, move the 5 big moves forward. We have invested heavily in $58.8 million buying 2 sets of trains to North County Transit, so they will be able to run the trains every 30 minutes in the peak, and so the frequency will be higher. We're proposing $72 million for part of our 46 new cars for MTS, again to improve service. We're investing a bit over $100 million to make the HOV lanes that we're building right now on the 5 and 805 high occupancy toll lanes like the I-15. We're doing a corridor management plan for every corridor in San Diego, the 12 corridors. We're finishing some design on the 52. We're improving and making a transit priority signalization in the 125-94. So these are the major things. So we believe that we had, and we're addressing the bluff. Once and for all, we're going to address that Los Angeles corridor. We are going to say, okay, we have a tragic accident last month where 3 people lost their lives in Encinitas. We have, I don't know, 3 or 4 collapses of the bluff. I don't know whether you walk that track. It's very close to the ocean. I did, and it's scary. We are going to actually look at the whole corridor from Oceanside to La Jolla and say, for the bluff, we need to move it inland somewhere. Do we tunnel? Do we do? That's what this money is going to do. In the Miramar, we're going to do a tunnel, or we're going to continue with that curve. Our objectives are 3. Safety, number 1, capacity and speed. And
Do we have the money? Do we have the money to do that?
we have the money to do the study. Now, we have the money to do the building. First of all, we don't know how much it's going to cost, but it's not going to be cheap. I think it's going to be in the billions. But let me tell you, God forbid, if that corridor is disrupted, we could deal with the passenger. We could do a gap bus ride. What do you do with the freight? And freight is so important to the economy of San Diego. I mean, many cars that come to our port and move north. So we can't afford not to fix it. And we cannot be a great nation, a great region, and accepting that people's gonna die just simply because we move our jobs. We can't do that. So it's gonna cost a lot of money, put it in front of the board, and they have to decide what's it's worth it or, but my goal is not, there's too many cooks in the kitchen right now. Everybody's trying to propose what's good for, it's like the airport when we started. Everybody has an idea how to get the airport connected to transit. Exactly the same process. We're gonna have a subcommittee, we're gonna have all the partners, NCTD, Caltrans, Sandag, everybody at the table. We're gonna do a study by experts, and they're gonna say, your best alternative is to do a tunnel here, move this a mile here, etc. And here's the cost. Put it in front of the leadership, and if they decide it's too expensive and it's okay to continue where we are, that's fine. But at least somebody needs to do it from a standpoint of there's no biases. We just want to do the right thing. And frankly, you know, we looked at this trenching idea, and the first thing I hear, I got a few-page letter from the Coastal Commission saying, oh, you can't do that. And obviously Dilmar said, oh, we don't want that. Well, sometimes it's not about what we want. Sometimes it's about how it's going to make it safe and how we're going to ensure continuity with moving goods.
So it's sort of humorous too. I mean, at some
It-
point, you build anything on the coast, history will tell you that it's going to fall down.
Absolutely.
It's
No
going to go
question.
away.
No question. And by the way, the tunnel technology has improved so much. People used to say, well, what are you going to do with all that smoke? That's no longer an issue. So we're going to look at all options. Jim is the guy who's going to be in charge of that study.
Another small project.
If it doesn't go well, you can blame him for anything that was wrong in that. But I think, and Jim will agree that I think it's time to have one cook in the kitchen and do it right, and let the leaders decide whether it's worth their time and cost. We're going to do that. So these are some of the big items on the $600 million expenditure, where the board is and what we heard from, and the boards. Some board members suggested a different list. They didn't want to invest in, say, the North County Transit. They want to take the money and do environmental impact on
And that's the list that you have a copy of in hard
We
form.
have so
So the one that you have in hard copy format is the one that we just received from.
Provide them the other list that the chairman was.
That's the one they have.
So that other list came in the meeting, says we have another. The first list is the staff recommendation. The second list came from Mayor Voss and Mayor McNamara from Escondido, which is pretty much just taking the transit money and investing it in EIS on the 78 and the 52 and the 67. That's what it is.
I don't mean to laugh.
All I can tell you is there's going to be an interesting discussion. I hope and I pray that my leaders will continue the course, because frankly you shouldn't be doing any environmental impact report or anything unless you know you have the money. Environmental impact report gets old after 3 years. Jim had an experience with that, with the mid-coast. Do you want to share that mid-coast?
Yeah. Metropolitan Transit System, MTS, and its predecessor MTV did a full-blown, fully signed EIR EIS for the Balboa segment of Mid-Coast, which took you from Old Town, really downtown, up to Balboa Avenue as a first leg, and that was fully signed. And it sat on the shelf because the region made a decision that it was going with the remaining money. It was going to finish the Mission Valley line, and that was probably the right decision. And so it sat on the shelf for a number of years. It got stale. For anybody that's involved in project delivery, you know how environmental documents can get stale, and it had to be completely redone. And so we have to watch out for what we invest in as far as environmental studies, so we don't have to do the whole thing over again, because they do get stale.
Yeah. And so, okay, I mean, this is some example that happened to us. So you do an environmental study, they're not cheap. Do environmental study on the 78, what is it? Those 8.
For the 5 to the
The whole
15,
thing.
44 million.
interchange. How much?
44 million.
44 million and redo it again in 4 years.
For an environmental study, 44 million, or to
Yes.
construct?
For the environmental document. For
44
clearance.
million.
Yes.
44, yes.
For-
The corridor itself is over $1 billion
Yeah. So for
For
me,
environmental studies.
for the clearance,
I know.
which includes studies and
I'm in the wrong
preliminary
business.
engineering and
You're
things
in
like
the right
that.
business, just in the wrong employer.
So you tell me, look, if the money is there and I have $2 billion to build that project, because I have 3 years after I finish, I would say, okay. Let's not argue the merit of the project. But by golly, there is no money. And frankly, even if we had the money, is that the right thing to do at this time? I think we need to expand capacity on the 78, no question about it. But that's why we're doing the congestion management corridor, so we figure out what's the multimodal approach. We'll include some highway, but we'll include transit through others. So that's the kind of debate that's taking place. People go on TV and I canceled the 13th meeting after consulting with the leadership, and we moved the meeting to the 6th of last week. And people are going to be saying, well, he canceled it because Friday the 13th. I mean, it's the land of ridiculous right now. All I can tell you is this team is going to continue moving forward what's right. At the end of the day, the board makes a decision and we'll have to accept whatever they do. And I have faith in them that they will do the right thing. So Jose is going to go into more detail with that. One thing that came up that this is the committee I want to, and I have a request for you. Remember, this $600 million have internet, Transnet, which is $130 million, and $470 for the state. We believe we're investing more than the Transnet money on the Transnet project. So we believe this, our lawyer John here does not believe this triggers, and I don't want to speak for you, but triggers the ordinance change. Some believe that this triggers an ordinance change and need a 2/3 vote. I don't really care about the vote either way, that's simple majority of 2/3. But I think you should weigh in. And I'll let John explain to you the issue after you hear from Jose. You're the Oversight Committee and your opinion matters. We don't think it triggers because we're actually investing more than Transnet money on Transnet project. And we're not investing any transit money on other than Transnet project, correct, Jose? So we don't think there's a trigger, but there's always different opinions. And your opinion matters if you want John to investigate. So John, you want to?
I think I'm going to talk to that if I could when
Jose, okay.
on that item.
All right. So with that, I'm gonna, unless you have a question for me, I'm gonna turn it to Jose and have him go through.
Just for clarity, for how all this relates to the agenda, I think we're gonna skip item 11 for now, and we're talking about items 12 and 13 that kind of tie together, correct?
Sure.
And so what you're talking about is you're good.
I-
Elaborate
yes.
more on item 12.
Yeah.
We started item 12.
Yeah, we can finish item 12,
Okay.
and then I can start on item 13 if that's what.
Okay, before we do that, we're gonna cover some details. Does anybody have any questions for Hassan on other than the item that's on the agenda? He mentioned like the airport and some other things. Any of the committee have questions related?
Well, that's something that's a little bit of maybe a broader question. I was actually at Friday's meeting, and I was just struck by just the volume and intensity of public interest. With both the housing formula as well as the regional transportation plan and the budget update, what have you. And it just struck me that there's really a huge opportunity for public engagement with the intensity of interest that the public has. You reference all of the running around you do and others in doing outreach. And I was just wondering if there's, particularly since some of these are going to be ongoing discussions, if there's any thought to actually trying to get these meetings on actual television. For example, the city of San Diego has its city council meetings on television, or even doing a video webcast as opposed to just the audio, because the audio by itself, it's a little bit hard sometimes to know who's speaking and to understand the dynamics in the room. So that's sort of part one. Then part two, I was just going to say, and with all respect, you need to get people working overtime or whatever it takes to make sure that the audio and video in the overflow room is actually working, because that's not a rocket science thing, and even the overflow room was overflowing. So,
First of all, I apologize for. We are actually just. It's embarrassing to say, but we're way behind in my team. In general, I mean, my team doesn't have laptops. It's frustrating. I am so frustrated with that I can't believe we have an amazing team and we're not giving them the equipment to be more efficient.
Why?
So I get that. I get it 100%. In the budget we have money to upgrade that. We have actually started the process of revamping the whole, not only audio, but everything about the board meetings. I will tell you this, our lease is up in 4.5 years, and I'm seriously looking at our option. Building, I can't meet with my team here. Every time we have an all-staff meeting, we have to go out somewhere. So we have some deficiencies, and on the meeting audio, I take responsibility. I heard about it. It's not good. We're going to do our best to overcome it. In your first question, you all met Irene. She's the acting media director. I think our goal is to do that and plus. Irene told her team that we need to reach hundreds of thousands of households, because there's an interest, but there's also, it matters. The public need to be involved in defining their future. One of the reasons we did the Vision Lab is to give the public an opportunity to actually participate. There is that excitement we need to capitalize on. So yes, we're looking into that to make it, there is certain legal stuff we need to go through in terms of making it like on a TV like the city does. But we're going to work through that and see how we do it. But on the IT, I apologize to the people who are frustrated with the audio. We're not, really, we have not had such crowds before, so we're kind of learning.
Well, it's a great opportunity to reach people. The other thing, you're probably aware, I don't know if you've talked about this, just a final thought on this subject, the county has gotten to include some evening meetings as part of their agenda to also
We're going to do all
enhance.
of that, yes, we're going to look at all of that. I'm looking for a boring meeting yet in my 9 months. It's not working for me, but we'll work on that. And the IT, it's a more expensive and longer process, but we started a few months ago, and I promise you, you're going to have the state-of-the-art equipment here in a few months. Thank you. Irene, you want to add anything to?
Oh, and in order to, And in order to help out with that until we get to that point where we can put, the board meetings on, live on TV like the city of San Diego does and the county of San Diego does, we're going to augment that by really beefing up our social media to invite people in a different way. So, we're not just sitting here and not doing anything. You'll be on Twitter later today because I've taken pictures of y'all. But I'm just saying those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do in order to engage the community more, and I think you'll see it really is working, but it's a small, slow progress, and I think we're doing a pretty good job on that. But yeah, I recognize what you say. It is frustrating. I was a reporter for 27 years, and not being able to, see something live and be a part of it, or even be on TV, like the County of San Diego board meetings are aired after they happen also. it can be frustrating, but we're working on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee outside of items 12 and 13? All right.
Okay, so item 12?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so Hassan already provided to you sort of the punchline for this report, but essentially, so we brought a program update to the board and to this group back in February. And then subsequent to that, there were just a lot of different numbers being thrown out there by different people, board members, etc. And we realized that there was just a lot of confusion as to what we had said back in February. So we wanted to come back in July and say it in a simpler, clearer form. And so that's what we tried to do. Anyway, so the whole discussion here relates to the 38% bucket of money. This is the major corridors bucket of money. It has nothing to do with any of the money that goes to the local jurisdictions for their local streets and roads, or to the transit agencies, or the grant programs, none of those. It's just the 38% major corridors bucket. Okay, so the punchline here is that between now and 2048, there's about $6 billion of major corridors money that will be collected. But of that, 3.7 are needed for debt service. So that all of the bond issuances that have been made since 2008 for all of the projects that we've already completed, all of that has to get paid back. And so 3.7 billion is what is needed for that. And so that leaves about 2.3 billion of the Transnet major corridors money left to complete remaining projects. But as Hassan mentioned, 2.3 billion is in year of expenditure. If you bring it down to today's dollars, that's about $1.4 billion. And more importantly, in terms of how much we can complete in the short term, most of that money, 80% of that Transnet money, is available beyond 2030. And so between now and 2030, there's not that much money from the Transnet side of things to complete projects.
And this is based on current revenue projections, not the original revenue projections.
Correct. This is, yes. Okay, so this is looking at the summary. So the cost to complete remaining projects.
Can I? That's a good question. As I told the board, this number could only go down because we have not factored in the recession that's coming. So we're collecting, the highest year we collected, I think, 294 million, and the lowest year is how much?
Well, this year we're collecting 306 million, is that right, Andre? Yeah. So fiscal year 19, we collected 306 million, right?
Yeah. And I'm not sure there are going to be many years in the next decade where we're going to collect 300 million probably. So this number could go down. Very unlikely is going to go up.
Okay, so so on the cost side, we've got about 24 billion worth of project costs. This is just projects. On the revenue side, we mentioned 2.3 billion of Transnet funds. Formula funds, about 6.3 billion. You add those up, and you are left with about a 15.8 billion additional funds needed. Now, that 15.8 could be offset, could be reduced if we are successful in getting competitive funds. But until we get those, we won't be adding those to the budget.
What are competitive funds?
So competitive funds are, for example, SP1, the gas tax that was approved a couple of years ago, includes a number of both formula and competitive programs. So on the competitive side, regions like us, San Diego, LA, Bay Area, Sacramento, we all submit project applications, grant applications, and they're scored usually by California Transportation Commission or the California State Transportation Agency, and they're scored based on certain criteria, and those projects that score the highest get the money.
So let me SB1, for example. There's a bill going on the legislature right now. 85% of it is formal. 15% of the total funds are competitive statewide. So anybody could apply, and if you're successful, so that becomes part of the competitive. It will be it would not be right to assume a number, because some years you're very successful, and some years you're not at all. Like for example, last year we applied for the Los Angeles Corridor funding, we got 0. Some years so competitive funds are there. We're going to compete for them as hard as humanly possible, but they're a source of fund that depend.
Just for clarification, can you refresh our memories with regard to when you refer to remaining projects? To what extent is that referring to? My recollection is that there were certain projects that were kind of lockbox, which would be, unalterable. Then there were other things that might have been promised or referenced as eligible.
Right. Okay,
so there's kind of a hierarchy.
Right. So there's, if you look at the ordinance, there's a listing of projects.
Right.
Within that list, there's about 46 projects, I think. Within that listing of projects, there were 3 that were lockbox. Right. So completing Highway 52 all the way to 67, which is complete. Widening of 76 between Bonsall and I-15 from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. That's also complete.
Right.
And the third project was the Midcoast project, which is under construction.
Right.
So once the Midcoast project is complete, all 3 lockbox projects will be done.
Right.
So all of the other remaining projects, some have been completed. I-15, the trolley modernization. There's a number of projects that are behind us and completed. But there's some other remaining projects.
And if I could just, for clarification, were those remaining projects, were they sort of deemed as promised or eligible?
Not promised. They're part of a list. Clearly, by the way.
Because I think a lot of the debate really relates to the degree to which people describe them as promised as opposed to...
To the contrary, actually the ordinance, the Transnet ordinance that have that list, clearly said, there's a language that said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that somewhere between 2004 and 2048, things could change. So told the board, you have the right to change priorities with 2/3 vote if you see, for that reason, because things change as you go along. So no, I mean, there's a debate for it. I don't consider them promised, but they are part of the list of the project that was in the ordinance.
Contemplated, I guess, might be a better word than promised.
But you'll recall that we did a 10-year review, a look back, right? And part of the conclusions of that look back were that looking forward, the board, should consider, as technology or other changes, come about, there may be a need or an opportunity to make some changes to that list of projects.
And then relating to that, if I could just, and hopefully if this seems better discussed somewhere else, please let me know, but very much related to that, the reference to Mayor Faulkner's proposal, I was also at that meeting, and it struck me that he was very careful to reference the term corridor as opposed to road. Mm-hmm. And so again, it strikes me that there's a bit of confusion, or maybe I'm misinterpreting.
No, you're not. As a matter of fact,
because this letter seems to interpret the motion as referencing the specific road as opposed to the corridor.
As a matter of fact, this letter is inconsistent with the action they took in July, because in July, very clearly, there's 3 bullet points. The first one is said, we need to meet federal and state mandates. The last bullet point says, in the context of complete corridor and 5 big moves, prioritize the corridor they listed. Complete corridor to me means you do a multimodal approach to a corridor. So by doing this, saying, no, I'm going to take the highway portion, is you're inconsistent with the last action. So you're right on. That's our interpretation. And that's why in the presentation, Jose made it clear we put the motion because we think we're very consistent with the motion with our.
Great, thanks for the clarification.
Okay, so you may recall this table, we're trying to show it, color coded. We also show ranges, just to denote that really it's a forecast with a lot of uncertainty, showing the same figures here. But again, the bottom line is that there's a funding gap that could be closed with competitive funds, but at this point, it's $15.8 billion.
So I want you to remember that last ratio. So what was our ratio last year, Jose, or the last decade, say, in terms of matching funds?
Of actuals, it's
Yeah.
about 1 to 2.25.
So we got 2.25 federal and state dollars for every dollar of Transnet. For us to fully fund this project, we need 1 to 9.6, which will never happen. 1 to 10, 4 times. So, you know, I mean, if people want to feel good about them, just say, oh yeah, we could fund them if we get 1 to 10. But you're not going to get 1 to 10. And that is where sometimes we fall guilty for trying people to make feel good, saying, oh, yeah, it's possible. No, it's not. It's not possible.
We used to be, I mean, going back, there were times where we were better. That's actually dropped off in recent years in terms of that multiplier.
Yeah, it
used to
did.
be 3, 4,
Yeah.
and then as it's gone along, it's kind of gone the other way.
Right now, moving forward, I'm not gonna assume more than what the actual's been. And if we get more, that's great. I'll celebrate with the board.
Yeah, just keep in mind also that the ratio before the methodology was different. It included debt service, so both the revenues and the cost associated with debt service. So this is different. This is just purely capital costs, not debt service. Okay. This was maybe just a bit of a prelude to the item that we brought just this past Friday. You know, letting the board know how much money was available in unprogrammed funds, available for projects. And then there had been some statements made about Transnet. Only 5% of the funds have been used for highways or whatever the case was. So we just wanted to provide the factual dollars that have been spent on the various modes, so highways or managed lanes. The grand total of the expenditures is about 42%. If you break it down between either Transnet or other funds, you can see what the breakdown is. But you can see that it's a lot more balanced than 5 and 95% or whatever it was. It's actually a lot closer to about a 40 to 60% ratio. And then down below is just some of the projects that we have completed, because we've heard also that we really haven't completed anything. And so we just wanted to remind people of all the projects that Transnet has completed. So that was that program update. Again, just trying to bring greater clarity to what we provided in February, a little bit clearer form. And so that's what we presented in July. We actually wanted to bring it to you in August, but you worked hard, so now we're here today.
We're bringing that to you every time there is a major shift either in the revenues or the cost, whether it goes up and down. We'll make sure that you're informed at all times what the situation is. But this is where we are right now as of today.
Any questions?
Okay. Anybody with questions on the presentation for 12 and quarter?
Well, I wasn't here in February, so thank you very much.
Sure.
For the initial presentation.
Maybe I guess a question, because I've seen advertisements in East County where I live, where developers are saying they're paying for widening the Highway 52 and they're gonna ease the traffic congestion because they're paying for pre-lanes or something. Is anybody here know are they putting up something to seed that, or are they actually?
So I don't know which developers you're talking about,
it's
but
Fed. I get things in the mail.
so if this is Santee, there is in the next item, in the revenue section, there is one line item for local funds coming from Santee. It's really coming from the developer.
Oh, then that's what I can pull it out of there to see the problem, because it just.
It's about $6 million.
I just can't imagine they could afford to fund the whole thing, all the needs, but they can afford a part of the needs. Okay, all right, thank you. Anything else on item 12? All right. Maybe so move to, is it you again, Jose, on item 13?
Back to me. Ready? Yep.
Oh,
You ready?
yeah, we're ready. You were talking to her though.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. All right, so this is actually an abbreviated presentation of what we presented on Friday. So we're very busy, as you can tell. We're doing a lot of planning work right now. We're developing a bold new vision that's part of the 2021 regional plan. But in the meantime, we need to have a regional plan that's valid. And so because the 2015 regional plan will enter a grace period in just 3 months, we're working to update what we call the 2020 federal RTP just to maintain conformity. There is state legislation, as Hassan mentioned, that would allow us, from a state perspective, to proceed in that direction, and it's making its way towards the governor's desk, hopefully. But as part of the 2015 regional plan, what implements it in the short term is the 2018 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. Brought my little prop here, so this is it. It's the first 5 years of the 2015 regional plan. And that regional plan, this RTIP, is updated every 2 years. And so right now we are just in the beginning stages of updating the assumptions and the proposals for the 2020 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. So this is an exciting time. There's an opportunity to accelerate the delivery of a number of prioritized projects. You've heard about the 5 big moves concept, and so we're applying that strategy as part of our proposals. And when I go through the budget amendment, the environmental and design work that's included there, that's funded there, would get about $1.4 billion in projects shovel ready, meaning ready to go to construction as those phases are completed. So one of the things that we also want to do as part of the budget amendment proposal is to position projects throughout the region to compete for projects sooner. Some of the planning work that's included here is actually a requirement to be able to apply for some of these competitive funds. And as Hassan mentioned, there's about $460 million worth of Transnet projects in the proposal, and that's supported by $130 million of Transnet dollars and the remainder by other state and federal dollars. So this is just a schematic of how the various documents that we talk about relate to each other. So at the very top you find the regional plan, brought that prop too. So it looks like this. It goes to 2050. And really it includes the division and the list of projects, the phasing of the project and programs that helps the region achieve that vision. From a federal perspective, what implements that long-term vision is the 5-year RTIP that I just showed you. So right now we are in the 2018 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. Gets updated every 2 years, so we're moving into the 2020 RTIP. The 2018 one ends in 2023. The 2020 will end in 2025. So it adds 2 more years worth of money, worth of projects for the board to consider. And then at the bottom, you see the budget, the SANDAG capital budget. So this is how the board manages its funds. And so this is where it includes all of its capital projects and includes Transnet, state and federal dollars. It is multi-year, and it actually goes beyond the horizon of the RTIP. But we need to communicate to the federal government what we want to do with state and federal funds, so we do that through an RTIP, the Regional Transportation.
If I may, just the point he made, that Hussein made earlier, because my request of you is important. So in this list, there is $463 million worth of Transnet project, but there is only $130 million of Transnet money. So the argument is we're funding more with other money at Transnet project. So if you're, so keep that thought in mind if you later want to ask questions.
Okay, so we showed this to the board to illustrate what is the project development process, beginning with planning through design, environmental, then design, and finally construction, just to illustrate what is the point of the budget amendment proposal of having so much money in planning for so many different corridors, and then for other projects maybe having environmental, design, or construction dollars. So the planning phase, one of the things that's sort of coming through as a requirement, at least from the state, is that we need to look at, as we do the planning phase, we need to look at corridors from a multimodal approach. So something that we've done already in that approach is the North Coast Corridor, where we looked at the existing I-5 freeway, the rail corridor, the arterials that are going up and down the coast, the arterials that cross both, the freeway and the rail corridor. We also looked at the lagoons and how we could enhance the natural environment, the bikeways. So that's something that's now a requirement from the state's perspective when we look at corridors. It's not just looking at a freeway or a rail line, but looking at the whole system. What are the needs? What are the opportunities? What could be improved? So all of that is done as part of a strategic planning process where we identify the corridor characteristics. Oftentimes you might see a picture of congestion on the different corridors, but the reasons for that congestion may be completely different. On one corridor you may have lots of trucks, it's an interregional freight corridor. In a different corridor, different freeway, you might see that same congestion. You might think it's the same reason, but really it's because there's a bunch of people coming and going and for very short trips, causing a lot of friction. And so what are the solutions to that? The solutions may vary depending on the corridor.
Jose, can you go to the previous chart with the planning process? So one thing since SB1 was enacted, there were a requirement that for the competitive SB1 funds, you have to have the corridor-wide plan before you compete. So if you jump into a project into environmental right away, you will not qualify to compete for SB1. That's why in this list, we did the whole 12 corridors of doing congestion management plan just to be able to compete for SB1 funding.
So that's similar to what I guess was called the Public Works Plan or something?
Yes.
For the
Yeah.
five.
Yes.
Correct.
Yep. Yeah, so the Public Works Plan essentially was sort of the result of that strategic planning process.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now it's a requirement to compete for SB1.
So, we go through that process. We applied the 5 big moves concept that we're implementing. And so we essentially develop a blueprint, which essentially is a set of solutions phasing not just on a particular mode, but across all modes. So that's the strategic planning that we want to do for all of the corridors, and it's included in the budget amendment. And then, beyond the planning process, there's environmental design and construction. We need to be strategic about which projects begin environmental or design, because as Hassan mentioned and Jim mentioned, you may start the environmental process, but if you don't have the money or some certainty that you'll have the money to complete that project, you may need to go back years later and repeat some of that work, and it costs money. So one of the things that we stressed to the board was that the funding is not unlimited. It is limited, and it's limited not just during the period, but also by fiscal year. So we need to prioritize the options and phase them over time. So the main proposal that we brought to the board is essentially to do a amendment to our budget. So the one that includes all of the capital projects. There's $298.6 million available in state and federal formula funds and Transnet funds through fiscal year 2023, but because we're in a transition period where we're starting the work to update the 2020 RTIP, which takes us all the way to 2025, there's an opportunity to augment that figure, and so we're proposing a budget amendment that's $593 million. You may recall, we've been trying actually to do this for some time now. You may recall that about a year and a half we came to the Transportation Committee, to you, and we talked about the possibility of adding new projects. There was money available unprogrammed at that time. But also at the same time, the campaign for Prop 6 was just getting started, and you might recall that Prop 6 was, if successful, would have eliminated the SB1 gas tax. Just before that April 2018 meeting, a few months before, the region had received a $195 million grant the North Coast corridor. And so the concern was that if Prop 6 was approved by voters, that $195 million grant would go away, and the region would need to backfill that grant with regional funds. So at the time, the Transportation Committee recommended holding off on making any kind of budget amendment recommendation until we knew what the outcome of Prop 6 was. So in November 2018, voters defeated Prop 6, but almost at the same time, we were starting to see significant increases in the cost estimates, because at that time we were working on the update to the regional plan that we were working on at that time. So in February, we brought an update, a Transnet program update, the one that I just essentially gave to you, identifying these cost increases. Revenues were pretty much flat, and so we were identifying at that time a $10 million shortfall. At the same time, the board voted to develop a bold new vision as part of the regional plan. So in April, the 5 big moves were introduced, and in July, as Hassan mentioned, we were directed to use the 5 big moves as part of our prioritization in terms of investments, and also as part of the 2021 regional plan. So getting into the budget amendment, essentially it's organized first by revenues, how much money do we have and when do we have that money. So that's the timing aspect, and then the projects themselves. So attachment 2, and this should be part of your in your iPads. So attachment 2 just shows the revenues. The very first line you see is the Transnet major corridor. So again, this is the 38% bucket that goes to these types of projects. It's $130 million total between fiscal year 20 and 25. And then below that, you see the other funds, whether it's federal or state formula funds. And Kai, you mentioned the local money from Santee that's shown at the almost the very bottom there. So you can see on a year-by-year basis how much money would be available. We've mentioned in the past that the region was moving towards a pay-as-you-go approach. So this doesn't show any bond proceeds. This shows the money as it comes in. And what that means is that you can't spend more money than what's coming in. And that's why it's limited in that sense. So this is the revenues, again, between now and 2025. Now I was going to go actually through the actual table. So this is just a schematic. I'm not going to go line by line on this one, but just to orient you on how to read this. So this is attachment 1A, there's attachment 1B as well. The one that you're looking, the one that was handed out was the one that was provided by Chair Vaz and Mayor McNamara. That was in response to what staff proposed, and that one is included in your iPads. But anyway, so there's 12 corridors, and they're numbered. Each corridor title references really the geographical location of what we're looking at. But as we've mentioned, a corridor means you're looking at a sort of a swath of territory and looking at what transportation facilities are already there, whether they're freeway, rail, transit, arterials, bikeways, whatever the case may be. And then as you move forward, you look at those, but you may also look at what opportunities there might be along that corridor. And for most of the, or for all of the projects, or all of the corridors rather, you'll notice that there's $3 million for what's called a corridor system management plan. That's the strategic planning effort that would be done for all of the projects. Again, the corridor system management plan is something that's needed. It's a requirement for us to be able to apply for some of the competitive grant programs that the state has. Within each corridor, you might see individual projects. So for some of the corridors, there are individual projects that are proposed. For example, on project 2B, we show the stabilization of the Belmar Bluffs. So you can see where that project is. It is color-coded, so for example, that project shows a red dot. At the bottom, it shows what that red dot means. So the funding that's being applied to that project would pay for completion of the design phase. So that's how the color coding works, design phase. So that's how.
So Jose, if I may, so remember, this is the first 5 years of the plan. So this goes to 2025. Our compliance with SB 375, reducing 19% per capita reduction, is 2035 compared to 2005. So these projects are critical towards achieving the greenhouse gas emission. So if we were to, or if the board decides they want to build capacity or clear capacity projects, that goes the other direction. And that's the other critical point in the motion that was taken in July. Make sure we meet the federal and state requirements. We believe this list is a balanced approach that will end up reducing vehicle travel, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, we don't have the modeling done, and we won't have it for the time of the 27th. But it's clear that if you clear a capacity project, you're going to have vehicle travel, and therefore, while it is the tip, not the RTP, it is part of the RTP. That's the point.
Jose, just to clarify, maybe that we're all on the same page, the 1A in our packet, the official packet, is the staff report.
Yes.
The staff version.
Yes.
The clean version in our handout is incorporating the red line strikeout.
That's right.
So both these versions are the Voss
Yes.
McNamara proposal.
Yes.
The clean version here is not the staff version.
It's not. No. One other thing to note, you'll notice that on the top side of the table, we've got the fiscal years. So what we're trying to show here is, if you see a dollar amount, for example, if I can point this thing here. So you see the $6 million here for the Del Mar Bluffs. What that means is that under fiscal year 20, because it's in the fiscal year 20 column, that's the first year that $6 million would be available for that project. So if you see a dollar amount that, say, is in fiscal year 22, as it is, say, here, that's the first year that money would be available for that project, for that year. And that's because of the timing. We're constrained by fiscal years. One other thing I wanted to point out is on the very left-hand side, some of the projects have a T. That means that those projects are Transnet projects. They're currently in the listing of the Transnet projects in the ordinance. And so if you add all of the dollars that are proposed for those projects, it adds up to about $460 million altogether. And of that, $130 million would be Transnet. The remainder, about $330, would be other state federal funds. So attachment 1A shows it by fiscal year. Attachment 1B, which you also have, shows the same listing of projects, but instead of by fiscal year, it shows them by fund source. So you can see which fund source is being proposed to go to each of the projects.
Just for clarification, when you're talking about the designation of the T.
Yes.
Now, going back to Hassan's comment or request of us, is it the contention amongst anyone at the board that projects not designated with a T need a 2/3 board vote for approval?
Maybe that's where I could jump in and interject a little bit. It's a little bit difficult. So overall, what we're looking at here, although there have been questions and statements that this will require an amendment to the Transnet ordinance, nobody has presented us with a specific argument about how they feel that this is potentially flawed and inconsistent with the ordinance. And so ultimately, as I've looked at this, I've just looked at it wholesale, and there's really two primary components to that. And one of them, as we look at it, is the allocation of the Transnet funds. The other one is the allocation of outside funds. So with the allocation of Transnet funds, Transnet Section 2 says that the revenue shall be deposited in a special fund and used solely for the identified improvements. That's a mandate under the ordinance. Now, we've not heard anything directly that says that your allocation of these Transnet funds are going to non-Transnet projects. According to what we're hearing from Jose, it appears that all of the Transnet funds are being allocated to Transnet projects, and that's entirely consistent with this mandate in Section 2. So the second component of looking at this is the allocation of outside funds. And in the outside funds in the budget amendment, 330 million of them are still going to Transnet projects, but 130 million are going to non-Transnet projects. And it appears at least that this allocation of outside funds to non-Transnet projects is potentially the basis for the current questions about the proposed budget amendment. And the primary issue then is, may outside funds be allocated to non-Transnet projects while other Transnet projects remain unfunded, at least not completely funded and incomplete. And so it really goes to the priority of Transnet projects versus non-Transnet projects. It's my opinion that the Transnet ordinance, including its current expenditure plan, does not prohibit the allocations reflected in the proposed budget amendments. Now, looking just at what you have in the Transnet plan, this is above and beyond any restrictions you have with colors of money, where certain types of funds can only be used on certain types of projects that may well be inconsistent with incomplete projects under the Transnet plan. But ultimately, looking at the language of the ordinance, what does it say about the allocation of outside funds and prioritizing projects? The Transnet project, or the Transnet ordinance in section 281 does talk about a mix of Transnet funds and outside funds. And of the total funds available, an estimated 5.1 billion will be used to match an estimated 4.7 billion in federal, state, and local and other revenues to complete the projects listed. So it reflects both dollar amounts and it reflects a ratio there. What's important is that as it looks at that, it's an estimate and it's expressed over the life of the ordinance. So if you take a look at that, in the expended and budgeted expenditures since 2008, and comparing what has been spent or budgeted by the board since the inception of the ordinance through today and through what's currently budgeted, especially when you look at the proposed budget amendment. First of all, the ratio. The ratio that is called for in this expectation, not mandate, is approximately a 1-to-1 ratio. To date, as Jose has mentioned, we're at about 2.25, I think, to 1 in terms of outside funds to Transnet funds. So the expectation that's set forth here in terms of a ratio has been far exceeded, more than double. If you look at it just in terms of sheer dollars, and the expectation in terms of sheer dollars, it was estimated that 4.8 billion in federal, state, and local and other resource revenues would complete those projects, be applied to those projects. Now those were in 2002 dollars, and certainly that would be escalated. But as you look at that today, to date we had about 5.5 billion in outside funds in year of expenditure that have been allocated, not even considering the additional amounts that are in this budget amendment. So looking at that just in terms of total dollar amounts, this expectation has been met to date, even though there's a lot of years remaining under the ordinance. So even though it's only an expectation, this paragraph, I believe, this budget amendment is not inconsistent with what we have in the ordinance there. But the second thing then, really taking a look at priority. Must uncompleted Transnet projects receive priority above any other non-Transnet projects in the allocation of outside funds? The two places that the Transnet ordinance speaks about priority, at least in terms of the major corridors projects, other than local streets and roads, and the first one has to do with the early action program, and that's what we talked about earlier as lockbox. There were three projects that remained incomplete from the first Transnet ordinance. Not very different from the situation we're in now, where there was a shortfall there. Those were carried over, and there was a mandate under the ordinance that those be given priority in the application of Transnet funds. Now, beyond that, the second place that the ordinance talks about priority is with the regional plan. And when you look at the whole of the ordinance, you can see a flow down from the big picture as Jose had it there, of the regional transportation plan, all the way down to this expenditure plan in the Transnet ordinance. So all projects to be funded with revenues made available under Section 4 must be consistent with the regional transportation plan. And project priorities or phasing shall also be consistent with the regional transportation plan. According to the current plan, the current regional transportation plan, which is the 2015 plan, in that there's Appendix A, the transportation projects, costs, and phasing. And so that listed for all the projects in that plan, it included not only how much money is going to be allocated based upon reasonably expected revenues to all those projects, but also a timeline of when is it expected that those projects will be complete. Taking a look at that, the incomplete projects in the Transnet plan, specifically really focusing probably primarily on Highway 67, State Route 78, those under the board's currently adopted regional transportation plan are in the out years of the plan. I think the 67 is 2035 and the 78 is out even beyond there. So comparing what is proposed in this budget amendment with that regional transportation plan, it is not inconsistent in terms of the priority that the board has established for those plans, or excuse me, for those particular projects, since this is just looking at what are we going to do in the next 5 years. Those projects could still be complete by 2035, 2050, wherever it is that they're in those out years. In terms of moving forward, if the board feels that they want to change priorities for how funds are applied to plans and the projects and when those projects are complete, the way for them to do that is in their update of the regional transportation plan. And that's how all of the mandates that we have under state law and otherwise flow through into the regional transportation plan and ultimately into the priorities that you see in the application of funds to Transnet projects. Ultimately, we have to express a plan that shows a 19% reduction in greenhouse gases. Whatever plan, however the board wants to do a mix of plan of projects and priorities of when those projects are complete, they're going to have to show that they can do that and still achieve 19% greenhouse gas reductions. Whether these projects get accelerated in the plan or fall out of the plan in order to comply with that, that's up to the board how they do that. They have that discretion. But in terms of measuring the propriety of the current proposed budget amendment to what's in the regional transportation plan, it's consistent with the phasing that the board has expressed in its currently adopted regional transportation plan. So that's looking at the language that you have in the Transnet ordinance in terms of priorities for applications of funds. The second thing to take a look at is past practice. And as we stand here today, SANDAG receives outside funds and they are not all applied to Transnet projects, notwithstanding the fact that we have Transnet projects that have funding shortfalls. Our TDM program, our 511 program, many programs are funded solely with non-Transnet funds, with state and local or state and federal outside funds. And that has been our practice, and it's been an unchallenged practice, and it's consistent with what's here, even though those are not Transnet projects. So, in summary...
So that's his summary. You see
Yeah.
his full report. Thank you. Now he's obviously our... our legal counsel, so if people's gonna listen to this, says, oh yeah, this stuff. I'm gonna give you the option of hiring an outside legal counsel if that's what you wanna do. We'd be happy to accommodate. Because I really do want to make sure, I believe him 100%, I trust him, and you know, he usually tells me things I don't wanna hear, but I still trust him. But if you feel like this committee needs an outside opinion to confirm what John just, we're happy to do it. But I really would like this committee to weigh in on the subject matter, hopefully sooner than later. And I do have to, before I go, I have to go, so if you have a question for me, I'll be happy.
I'm just real quick relating to what you just covered there is, I guess punchline is, I'm understanding your opinion is that the budget proposed here is not inconsistent with, doesn't require a change of the ordinance, isn't changing the ordinance, right?
Correct.
So, okay, all right.
And so, at the meeting when this was being discussed, I had to leave after about the 5th hour, so I presume the actual board vote on this got pushed back to.
No, that was one never intended to vote on
Oh,
this.
okay, sorry.
So this was, you know, I didn't want us to be accused of just bringing this and then in one meeting, so I wanted this for information. I
This
also
is
just,
information, got it.
just so you know, I met individually with every single board member, with Jose and our team to share with them this. So I didn't want them to be surprised by anything, but they were never intention of taking action on this.
So then but there will be action.
Action on the 27th.
27th is when it's scheduled.
Okay, so of September.
Yes.
So we will not have another scheduled meeting between,
Correct.
prior to that.
Correct. We can if you want us to meet if you want. We can.
Because, I mean, from a process standpoint, wouldn't this need to be agendized for
Yes.
a subsequent meeting?
And
In any case, if we were to
that's
have
the
a
route you
formal
go, we will make a special meeting there, right? She said right, so that's.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah, no,
do we
you're
even
right.
have the ability to vote on this
You're
now?
right.
Because it would have to be
Correct.
publicized and all that.
No, I'm expecting a second
Can I
meeting,
steal my agenda?
another meeting for you. Sorry, did I take your?
Our role, and we could decide on some opinion we want to convey to the board, but we can't, I don't think it's our purview to vote on the plan. We can give opinions to if we decided as a group we wanted to have staff convey opinions to the board, we could do that.
Well, I
Maybe
think
I
the fundamental role of our committee is to ensure that funds are being spent consistent with the ordinance.
Exactly.
And so, without judging the contention is that this amendment would be contrary to the
Yes. And that's what
ordinance.
we're
So-
asking you to do.
So I think it's relevant, no?
Can you describe for me what weigh in means? How we would weigh in the absence of a vote? What form would that take?
So the way it's been done in the past is, if you want to weigh in on any matter, you direct us, or, you know, essentially, when we go back to the board, you say, please inform the board or convey to the board, you know, perhaps a very specific language, this is what our opinion is on the matter. It's how it's been done before.
And it's not to, as this is agendized, it's agendized as an information item, understanding your role as a committee, but also your agenda also has a blanket statement that the committee may take action on any item appearing on the agenda. So ultimately, whether you choose to take an action today, not take an action at a future meeting, all of those would be consistent with limitations of the ground.
And I don't want to push you and say, well, you know, I want you to take your time, and if you want another meeting, we'll do another meeting. I want you to think about it, and also we'll make sure John makes available for you whatever resources you need.
I have one question, I'm sorry. What I heard, and I don't know if I heard this correctly, but you made a statement in there about there are some things in there that we've been doing in the past that haven't been questioned, that might not be exactly what the ordinance says. That
No, I'm sorry, if I communicated that, I misspoke. It's that we have applied outside funds to non-Transnet programs.
Right.
And that is, there's no prohibition in the ordinance about that, and that's completely proper and reflective of our past practice, and no one has ever questioned that in the past.
So were you saying that in the context of, what I understood the ordinance was that Transnet funds should go to Transnet projects as a priority, but you've applied them to
No, we
Outside
applied
funds.
outside funds to outside projects.
Okay, that's where I'm
Yeah.
trying to, I got lost in there, and maybe I
Yeah,
zoned
absolutely.
out from
Transnet
that.
funds have only been applied to Transnet projects.
Okay.
It's outside state and federal funds that have been applied to non-Transnet projects.
That's the clarification.
Thank you very much. I hope you won't take 5 hours for this meeting.
Trust me, we won't. We have a curfew.
So, okay, so, Well, were you finished?
I wasn't
with your-
finished, but, I mean, if you want,
Well,
Want me to finish
my
and then you can
suggestion would be
continue?
My suggestion would, you guys agree, is to let staff finish the
Okay.
presentation, and then we can have.
okay, so one last thing I just wanted to highlight of this particular, proposal. It is strategic in nature. Even though it looks like a lot of money, almost $600 million, when you compare it to the full cost of constructing every single one of the projects here, it is nowhere near enough. It would require billions. So what we're trying to do here is being strategic in terms of doing the strategic planning, both to meet the requirement to be able to compete, but also to develop sort of the smartest set of solutions that we as a region can bring forward to our board. So that's part of it as well. In terms, I just wanted to just quickly highlight some of the projects. So out in the East County, one of the projects that was part of the directive, the motion back in July, was to look at the 67, so Project 6C. And if you look at the table, Corridor 6, Project C includes completing the environmental phase for an emergency access or an evacuation route for people living in Ramona along the Highway 67. Another project that was also highlighted, the 78 corridor. What we're including there is, in addition to the strategic planning, which is Project 8A, is Project 8B, which is completing the design for the 1578 Express Lane Connector project. That project actually extends the express lanes along Highway 78 about a couple miles inland, all the way to Twin Oaks Valley Road. And then lastly, in the Spring Valley area, Project 9B, this is the 94-125 missing connector project. So the funding here would complete the design as well as the right-of-way phases for that project. In terms of just some of the deadlines that we're facing, I mentioned that the current plan enters a conformity grace period on December 2nd. What that means is that beyond that date, any RTIP amendments are really limited to what they can do. It's really just minimal things. We cannot add new projects to the RTIP. So the types of projects that we're including here in this budget amendment, some of them are new to the RTIP. We would not be able to add them to the RTIP beyond December 2nd. And in terms of more specific deadlines, we brought on September 6th an information item. We expect to bring this back to the board on September 27th for action. That will then allow us to begin the RTIP amendment process so that we can bring the RTIP amendment back to the board for approval October 25th. And then that would allow us just barely, but enough time to send it to the state and federal government for their review and approval. That would happen in November. We need to get all of that approved before December 2nd.
What happens, so, got a grand plan,
Yes.
worked very hard on this,
Mm-hmm.
it gets shot down.
Yeah, so essentially what happens is we would lose about 6 months lead time in terms of being able to work on this stuff. So if this is approved with the timeline that I just showed you, the region, whether it's SANDAG or our partner agencies, would be able to start drawing on that money, especially for fiscal year 20 projects, and start work. If the board says, you know what, we need more time, we don't want to take action right now. So we would need to wait until the next regional transportation plan is adopted, which is expected about April, May of next year. And then at that time, we would be able to amend the RTIP once again. So we would lose that period of time.
Basically a year and a half, is what you're...
No, about 6 months. Because it's next spring when they would do that. So that would be one consequence. The other potential consequence is there's about $44 million of federal formula funds. The federal government operates under a use it or lose it. And so if those dollars are not programmed on a specific project and then obligated to that project before the end of the federal fiscal year, those dollars are subject to be lost. Not guaranteed, but it's always a possibility.
And there's one EIR we can't do.
That's right. That's one EIR we can't do. So that would be the consequence. So just last slide, you know, this is a strategic proposal just to amend the fiscal year 20 budget. It increases the project competitiveness by completing some of the planning work, and it kickstarts the work now versus waiting until May of 2020, which is what you were just asking. It addresses long-standing needs. It also advances project delivery. This is in particular to Highway 67. So if you look at the phasing in the regional plan for Highway 67, it shows the two to 4 lane widening occurring or being completed until 2050. The scope that's included in this budget proposal addresses more of the emergency evacuation aspect of it, and that would be advanced considerably. As we've mentioned, we believe that this is consistent with the Transnet measure. And lastly, by acting in September with the budget amendment, it reduces the risk of losing funds. So with that, now I'm done.
Thank you. I'm sure there's a number of questions or thoughts amongst the group. I guess from just maybe to start it out is, you know, I know the list, and there's, you know, we see suggestions for shuffling things around by politically. There's some different opinions about which projects are which priority.
Right, and if you want me, I can summarize what they're proposing, but it's
well, before we, you know, I think to me, like on your last slide, which was, you know, it was the bullet, you know, it's consistent with the ordinance. That's, at least for me personally, that's the bigger issue than you know, there's different opinions about project priorities, but if they're appropriate projects under transit things, then that, you know, I don't feel it's necessarily our role or my role to decide which project should be priorities and another, as long as it's being done appropriately. But the question of the consistency with the transit measure, I mean, before I heard John speak, you know, my general feeling was, from my knowledge, was that it felt like it was consistent because the money, transit money is going to transit projects. But I know there's a lot of, you know, things being said out in our world right now about suggesting it isn't. So, you know, I guess my question maybe to the committee is, you know, how comfortable with that are we, or what more do we need to know to, you know, do we feel like we need to weigh in on that? And I'll say, you know, one more thing is that, you know, if they're going to a board in a couple of weeks ideally for a vote, and we were to, if Hassan suggested that we were to go get independent counsel that the group would hire, you know, I would question, you know, we probably couldn't get that opinion, somebody lined up and get that opinion in that time frame. So, yeah, you know, that's something also to factor in. I don't know how that would even work. So, anyway, maybe I'll stop and then say, you know, if others have thoughts on
questions.
Where we
Don't mind starting.
go for it. Yeah.
So it's an informational item, but I get the feeling that the goal is to have some sort of, we recommend this, or we feel this is appropriate, so that can be taken to the next, the transportation committee. Is that next?
We go back to the board.
Go back to the board, and you can say, ITOG said, and they think this is correct. So that's my understanding. That's so these shown with the T. These are all transit projects. And I think, Jose, I think you just said that there's the 67 one that was brought forward from 2050.
Yes. The
ones that are shown on the Voss McNamara, they don't show a T. Are they? I'm assuming they're still part of transit.
So we're giving to you what we received from the chair and from Mayor McNamara, but those projects are also transit projects.
So what we've done, what staff has done, is taken what they think would be the appropriate transit projects, whether they're near-term or long-term, brought them forward with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, correct? Is that, isn't part of the goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Yes.
So these would in effect do that. And we've done the analysis.
Projects that we've The projects that
Your
we,
projects.
yeah, our
You
projects,
recommend.
so they're part of the 2015 regional plan. And so, yes, they contribute, because it's just a subset of all of the projects. So they contribute towards the larger goal of achieving those targets.
And you can use the 2015.
Yes, yeah, because right now we're operating under the 2015.
And the revised or the Ross McNamara version doesn't necessarily have that analysis or that guarantee or that certainty that they're going to reduce GHG. Or nobody's done them.
Well, those projects are also included in the current regional plan, so they also contribute towards that, right? But as we move forward with the new regional plan, some of these projects may not contribute towards that, may not help us meet those goals.
So I kind of agree with what Kai said. I don't feel comfortable saying that this list is what should be done. I don't think that's our role. I feel like the board of directors would say, this is what's in Transnet, and then we say, yes, it's being spent appropriately. My personal opinion. I just don't feel comfortable saying, yeah, I think this is the list, and not this, and not that.
And we don't have, I mean, I guess to say, we don't have an obligation to make a recommendation on projects or anything really, but it's our.
I think our recommendation maybe should be, goes back to what you said before, what our role is, and saying maybe that, hey, as long as it's Transnet dollars being spent on Transnet funds, we have time to the board to figure out which projects they feel are the ones, and that's what their job is, to figure out which ones are there. Am I right? I mean,
yeah. Well, that's
I think that's what you're saying.
And based on what we know, I guess, do we feel comfortable that, that we feel that it's being done appropriately in terms of how
Well,
to
if our
sign
council, I
Well-
think the question is, if we're asking the council, if the Sandag council is saying, hey, they feel very comfortable that these dollars are being spent consistently the way they have been spent for X number of years, and that we're not changing our direction or the way we're spending these money, then I think that's what they're asking us, is saying if we're being consistent, not asking us to opine on which projects, maybe they are, but we're not going to. I think you're correct in saying
But
that.
I think that's part of the question, but I think there's another question that's being raised, which to us is, it's also an important question. And that's whether the decision for the board to approve this budget amendment requires a 2/3 majority vote, because to some board members, they consider that this action would
Right.
constitute a ordinance amendment.
Right.
Well, wouldn't that be
So-
the same for Ross
That's the
McNamara?
whole-
Well, so
That's
if
the
I could just,
question, whether
for
it needs a 2/3
clarification,
vote.
though.
Hold on.
I just want to clarify, wouldn't this have the same potential 2/3 vote requirement as?
So the question was raised more on staff's proposal. I don't know how they would feel about the Voss McNamara proposal, because that was not raised.
Well, and that actually goes to my question, which is that if I compare the staff proposal to the Voss McNamara proposal, if I'm reading it correctly, other than changing some of the allocations of funds, the only thing that the Voss McNamara proposal eliminates that was on the staff proposal is the fourth item under the North Coast Corridor, which is the 2 additional train sets.
That's correct.
So I guess my fundamental question is, are the people who are questioning the eligibility of the non-Transnet projects having a similar question about the non-Transnet projects on the Voss proposal? Because the Voss proposal includes, largely most of the same projects that are on the staff proposal. It's just that the amounts allocated are a little bit different. Do you understand my question?
I think you're right, and I'll say that in my analysis of what I understand the questions being raised are, I don't see a material difference between application of that to the staff proposal forward to the Voss-McNamara proposal, because it really goes to, it's the allocation of the non-Transnet dollars. And can you allocate non-Transnet dollars to non-Transnet projects instead of allocating those non-Transnet dollars into otherwise unfunded Transnet projects?
Yeah. So from my perspective, again, there may be different, opinions amongst the various members but if somebody's objecting to some portions of the staff proposal based on the notion that those projects or some of those projects aren't permitted under the ordinance or need a two-thirds approval, then it would seem that arguably everything except the train sets would similarly need that two-thirds approval on the Voss-McNamara.
I think you're right. I think when they talk about two-thirds approval, it's not so much that the budget amendment requires a two-thirds approval. It's that in order to move forward with the budget amendment, you would have to amend the ordinance together with it.
And so, again, I guess nobody in the room can provide insight as to whether there are actually different opinions that are really relating to both proposals, or if, I don't mean to make this sound overly harsh or critical, or if the only objection is to the staff proposal because of the allocations, and then that this two-thirds question is just a mechanism of protesting the allocation.
Yeah, I think that's what, I think you're hitting
But more fundamentally, I think it's a reasonable question. It goes to the heart of what this committee does, is to help ensure that the funds are being spent consistent with the ordinance. Hearing what you've said, and believing the representation that the non-Transnet items are being funded with non-Transnet funds, it would seem like it shouldn't be a problem. The only thing is that the complexity of this is such that it would be hard to say we've done a thorough job in considering it just in the five, with your nice summary, without just spending a little bit more time on it and actually looking at the sections of the ordinance that you've quoted from. So I think that's the trickier part.
I think that's the part that it's very hard for us without getting some counsel or, because we're going to read it or we all getting an opinion on it and reading it.
Personally, I'm comfortable reading the language. I'm not sure I'd need an outside lawyer's interpretation.
Right, but what I'm saying is that we all sit and do that and then have a conversation about it. Are we going to do that today? Probably not.
Well, it seems hard to say that we'll have been able to do a thorough job of the diligence on this without another, what would probably be a fairly brief meeting to at least review the language that you're referencing in black and white, to have some discussion. And
is that something they're asking? Maybe I should say.
Hassan is asking, but even if they're not asking, it's a very legitimate question.
Is that something that Kai says we got to have another quick meeting or a teleconference, or how does that work?
I'm not sure a quick meeting would be all that helpful. If it's going to be an action item, probably needs to be posted. What's our minimum posting requirement?
72 hours.
Really? 3 days?
So that would occur before the December 27th meeting?
That's what they're asking us.
Potentially, or I think Hassan, as I understood him, he said, don't feel like you have to rush. If we need to talk about it again on the 27th,
I think he's asking later date. But he's talking we got his point, that I think he's asking us to, as part of the ITOC's role, maybe he's a little late, maybe it came quicker than we'd all like, but I think he's asking us to give our opinion and weigh in, is maybe the word, what you're asking us to do. This is something they want us to weigh in on.
Yeah, so maybe to move this along, I would propose that we have a special meeting. The timing of such would be that the results of our meeting could be reported out consistent with whenever you post the information relating to the board meeting on was it the 27th?
And does that have to happen?
Posting the
20th?
So we post the week prior to the meeting. So it would be the Wednesday prior to the 20th, or the 18th.
So the meeting's the 27th, so we would post the 18th, the Wednesday, the 18th. Is that correct? Between the 18th and the 20th?
Yeah.
Is that right? Which leaves basically a week. So the remainder of
If
these
you want to
would
keep it on a Wednesday.
in the beginning of June.
Was there, would we have to have, I mean, I guess would we have to have them done before they posted, before the meeting?
Well, I mean, you know, I think it would be, to have the impact that we want, I think you'd want to have the results of our deliberation.
Otherwise, it would be the verbal part of the stuff.
Right, yeah. But, you know, if it's not feasible to do that. And also just for further elaboration, personally, I'd be comfortable, it's a question for you, John, as to whether you'll have had the time, maybe you've done already, to actually do some version of a memo laying out what you've presented to
Yeah,
us.
right now I just have speaking points, and I can certainly translate those into a memo within a very short order of maybe a day or two.
I mean, personally, I'm not sure I'd need to hire an outside counsel to do that exercise.
I think that would be a waste.
Well, to that point.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. That may be something we want to do in the future, so I am interested to know what the timeline would be to do that. Sounds like it's not going to be useful here. Ultimately, the goal is to be correct and on time. I don't want to miss those two, very important things to get another legal. In terms of building your fort, the most defensible thing you can say to council or to the board, that might have been a good thing to do, but that would probably take 6 months, so that's out. I'm happy to make a statement today that it's consistent. I don't want to recommend anything. I don't think that's helpful, because this wasn't an action item for us. We make recommendations. It's just easy to pick on us. But if it's helpful to staff for the board to make, or for the committee to make a statement that it's consistent, if we convene, let's make sure we can get a quorum, sometimes that's a challenge. Would we invite these two gentlemen? There's really the value in having a public meeting that you post, all right, we're going to consider this, is to invite others or give them the opportunity to come in. So even if we did invite them, if we have a meeting to discuss this specifically, they might show up anyway. So we would, we might want to be proactive and say, all right,
So these meetings are open meetings, so they're more than welcome to
It's an open
come.
meeting, and you've got an informational item that gives.
And also just to point out, the questions regarding whether it's 2/3 or not, were not actually raised by either Voss or McNamara.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's a Voss McNamara issue, it's as much as it's a broader question that's a legitimate question.
My feeling is that the consistency, it's, no matter whether it's their version or somebody else, or the staff's version of the expenditure in the list is really not, well, I guess from my perspective, not what it's the consistency with the ordinance thing that we're talking about, and it'll apply to any list here that's of similar shuffling around it, as long as it's talking about Transnet projects.
I think you want to give the board the right to maybe have a vigorous debate.
It's a public meeting.
No, but I'm just saying have their right from this to have a debate. Maybe these two things that they've got in front of them, maybe there ends up being a combination or it's different. But I think that's what we're looking at, right? Is the right to be able to not have I think the question is.
I don't think this even has anything to do with the board.
Right.
Believe me, when I was the chair of this committee when the whole revenue error forecasting thing came up, and I can't tell you how many times I read what the mandate of this committee is. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, the fundamental mandate of this committee is to ensure that the funds are spent in accordance with the ordinance. So this doesn't even have anything to do with the board. This has to do with our responsibility, because what are we here for if not that? And so there's a legitimate question as to whether this is consistent with the ordinance, and I think we should exercise proper diligence and spend the time. And if John could summarize his thoughts we all have the ability to read the ordinance, as refresh ourselves, having, read it sometime in the past, and to have a considered discussion of whether these appear consistent or not. I mean, based on what I've heard, I would agree with you, Michael, that I would probably go on, but it's hard to say that we've done a thorough job in assessing that.
If it came back to the ITOC, would it be another information item?
It sounds like what you're looking at is a maybe discussion, possible action.
Yeah, and I mean, and particularly in light of the executive director asking us for a point of view, I feel like it's certainly within our purview and responsive to actually give a formal recommendation if we have the opportunity to do that reasonable consideration. So I realize everybody's busy and it's not a simple thing to carve out time, but
I think it's something that's what we're hearing is this is important, right? I mean, we've got to. Hassan hasn't asked us a lot to really, hey, this is something I want you to give an opinion on. I want you to weigh in on. I think it's worth taking serious.
So how would we?
So it sounds, yeah.
It sounds like we have some general consensus that we'd like to try that, but
So it sounds like the memo could potentially be available this Friday, and that could potentially give you the weekend to mull it over, and then you could potentially set up a meeting for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, potentially. Or you could also, if you wanted to, form a subcommittee and maybe place the responsibility on that subcommittee to, that could be another option.
if we formed a subcommittee to that, we couldn't really convey it as a.
Yeah, that might be difficult because the purpose of the subcommittee would be to report back to ITOC for ITOC to take action.
Timing wise, just
So,
We were something by Friday. Tuesday. Work on my calendar.
on Monday? Tuesday the 17th?
That's the only day I'm not available.
No?
That's okay.
I can make the 16th work. The 18th.
Monday or
will not
Wednesday
work
is
at all.
fine. I apologize. That's the only day.
What's the only day you have now?
It's not available is Tuesday. I'm out of town.
So the 16th is okay?
I could do Monday also.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, how
Depending on the
far-
time,
So that would be a, what we call a special meeting.
Special meeting.
One
Special
action,
meeting.
one item.
Except that, yeah, so we would basically post the agenda soon. We would need to post it here 72 hours prior to the
Right.
meeting time, so.
So you could
So you're looking at me on Monday? Yeah, so you'd have to post tomorrow.
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Which
But the agenda, that's fine.
we can post the agenda without the supporting material.
Correct.
Right, it's only the
Right.
agenda that's mandated to be posted
Yeah.
74 hours in
Yeah.
advance.
But
So
for.
what time would it be?
Well, Monday the 16th, do I have a quorum? All I have is Sadowski, Halpern, Fuller. I have Raymer. Anybody else? That's 4, so.
Or
So Monday the 16th, if I have 4, I
He's
have a
waiting for his
quorum.
phone. Give us a second, he's waiting for his phone to come
Morning
up.
or afternoon?
Monday the 16th at
Morning's better.
Morning's better?
morning,
Just similar to that.
Earlier the better.
In the afternoon.
so morning. If these 4 members are, okay. We will work with that.
And the
Mike might be there.
the item would be, can you maybe summarize what we would be reading in the action box here with the determinations consistent with the ordinance or?
That sounds like a determination of consistency of the proposed budget amendment, describe that more fully
The
with the
transit
transit ordinance.
Yeah.
And frankly, it would also be helpful, and maybe this is already something that you've done, is to just have the summary of the projects by funding source so that there's clarity in a visual way, if possible, that the non-Transnet projects
So
are
so
fully
attachment
funded.
would be essentially.
I think it's there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought that there was an attempt
It's
to do
there.
that.
Hard copies up on the table. Apparently, I didn't grab one, but it is in the
Okay.
electronic version. It's one.
Yeah, essentially looks the same as 1A, but instead of fiscal years, it's fund sources.
So it's 1B, attachment 1B.
And the
Gotcha.
overall
Yeah.
question about
We have hard copies too, I'm sure you can.
clearly resides with the board and staff. We're just to review whether or not those projects are consistent with the board. We don't participate in whether or not this is correct. We're just looking to see whatever is put in front.
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we're assuming
We
it
can
is
have
correct.
opinions,
Excuse me.
That was, is that what the attorney told us 4 years ago about the 125? This is your task is just to review the project in front of you and whether or not it's consistent with the ordinance, and not to determine whether it's a good project or a bad. Was that
Correct.
Well, there is also some obligation that the funds be spent. I mean, that's what we do the performance audit. There is an obligation to ensure that the funds are spent, and I don't know what the actual word is, but that they're spent, I don't know whether it's efficiently or effectively or something. So there's a sort of a soft component there, but I think fundamentally you're right.
This is the longest boot.
And it certainly shouldn't be a freeway versus transit discussion. That's not.
Where will that'll occur at the board meeting?
So I
That's
assume
going to happen
we'll
one
be back,
Oh, it's tough.
we'll be back here, same, have a meeting here, same place, so.
All right, so the
Same
16th.
Sounds like we'll figure out if it's in this room or.
Right, but
whatever.
it's here, that's fine.
All right, so, look, I guess I know we're getting tight on time, we have a couple more agenda items. It sounds like we're close here, the idea is we're gonna get a opinion memo or from, John by Friday sometime. Tomorrow, you will notice a special
Yes.
meeting for us to occur on Monday morning, and it will have the one agenda item as we
Yes.
discussed.
Yes.
Okay, and everybody,
I'm in for the 16th.
yeah, yeah,
Great.
16th is what we're talking about.
Okay.
All right,
Super.
is there anything we need to, anybody need to do to clean up without a good summary?
I think if anything, in terms of ancillary direction, you talk about potentially having an on-call outside counsel, and that's something you certainly, that's allowable under the ordinance, and you can work with Ariana to work on a procurement for some names for your consideration, to have somebody just on standby.
Maybe just, right.
Yes.
So what time, I apologize, what time will this meeting be on Monday? Is there a proposed time?
So morning to me would be
Morning would
sometime
be
between
better.
9 and noon.
Earlier
We'll
the
kind of
better.
look for.
Yeah, so do you want to set, let's say.
Would you like to set the timer?
Preferred time would be 9:30 or
9:30?
something, but
That'd
if,
be better.
and subject to availability of the room or whatever,
Right.
you guys can look into it.
They'll find a place for
But
us.
morning with
Yes,
preferred time 9:30.
Okay.
got it.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, everybody good? All right, if we can't, so we skipped over item 11, which is the, RTIP amendment number 6, so,
Item
we're gonna-
11 is next. Item 11?
Ready for that?
Yeah.
I don't
So
have
circle
it. I don't
back
have
to
a
that.
copy.
All
That's
right,
right.
thank you.
Good morning. So as Jose had mentioned, and I think you've heard before, that when the regional plan expires, we will not be able to do any formal amendments to the RTIP until we pass and have federally approved new plan. So in anticipation of that, staff has taken steps to mitigate the risks associated with any delays to the RTIP. And in January, staff sent a survey to local agencies to determine whether there are any schedule changes to expected for any capacity increasing projects that are in the current RTIP, if anything was expected. Based on the results of that survey, an amendment to analyze the emissions impact of those schedule changes appeared to be warranted. So in March, the amendment was open to capture these changes, and projects were modeled with the new changes. Agencies were then asked to submit any funding changes for those projects. The revised schedules and the air quality analysis procedures and results were reviewed with the Conformity Working Group, which is a committee consisting of representatives from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Air Pollution Control District, California Resources Board, Caltrans, Federal Highway Administration, and Federal Transit Administration that provide interagency consultation on air quality conformity and programming. The modeling verify that the revised schedules continue to conform to the applicable state implementation plan for air quality. The entire amendment and the air quality conformity information were posted for a 30-day public comment period from August 6th ending on September 6th, and no comments were received. At its September 20th meeting, the Transportation Committee is scheduled to approve Amendment Number 6 to the 2018 Regional Transportation Improvement Program and its air quality redetermination of the regional plan. The ITAC is asked to review and comment on the Transnet projects included in the amendment. Attachment 1, the Summary of Changes report beginning on page 3, provides a summary of both the changes in schedule and in funding for all the projects, and the Transnet projects are indicated with a TN in the left column. Most changes were minor to schedules, however, several projects did cross conformity periods. The most notable changes are an acceleration of the later phases of the I-5 HOV lanes and the I-5 State Route 56 interchange. Bradley Avenue project was separated into 2 phases, and the first phase would be the widening of the overpass, which would open first, and then the second phase is the interchange, and since the county doesn't have enough funding to complete that, all the construction was removed from the project, and the county will be seeking Transnet commercial paper to fund the construction of that phase. And finally, $13.4 million was added to the I-5 Voight project as the guaranteed maximum price from the CMGC contractor was higher than the estimate, and this budget increase was approved by the Board of Directors at its June 28th meeting and was on your July 10th consent agenda. So attachment 3 on page 19 also includes a map showing the major transportation projects included in this amendment. Cal 68, which is shown as letter N on the map, was removed during the public comment period and will be included in amendment 8. So this is different than your usual amendment. It's mostly schedule changes. So are there any questions pertaining to those? No? Any questions on air quality? Because I brought my expert.
It doesn't seem like that much money, compared to the overall scope.
There were very few changes in funding. Yes.
Right, I mean, this seems...
This was done mostly to reset those schedules so that we could proceed and not run into any risks with conformity later on as those projects begin to open to traffic, and we can proceed on schedule.
This is one of the smallest amendments I've ever seen.
Yeah, I would just compliment you and the team on the summarization. It's really very effective.
Very
helpful.
detailed. Very detailed. Made it easy.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Anybody else? Good? No?
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
No credit for showing up.
Some of this air quality stuff is way beyond me.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Let's see. We're going to so we're item 14 by my count with Andre and team.
So good morning. We bring this financial market update to you on a quarterly basis, and pretty much like last quarter, we've had extreme volatility in both the stock and bond market. I think this volatility is based on a number of factors that we've seen, in particular global growth concerns, there's Brexit, there's a US-China trade war going on, and kind of the unclear monetary policy from the Feds. However, the Fed did bring some calm to the market back in June when they did cut interest rates by a quarter basis points. Potentially next week they have another meeting, and markets are also hoping for another quarter basis point cut. I think part of why they cut rates in June was the fact that there's kind of a slowdown in the market overall. And also last time we talked about the inversion in the yield curve, something that I think the Fed watches fairly closely. That's basically when shorter term yields yield more than longer term yields. We had the inversion of the yield curve on the 2 and 5s and the 1 and 10. And just this last week, we actually had an inversion between the 3-month Treasury and the 30-year Treasury. So in other words, 3-month Treasury was yielding 1.95%, 30-year Treasury 1.93, which really doesn't make any sense that you would invest your money going out so long at less than a 3-month rate. But basically, what that portends to is a potential recession. And I think since 1950, when this has happened 7 out of 7 times, economists will say that a recession has happened. For some reason, economists think that the recession may avoid it this time. Maybe I'll let Jim try to explain that. Generally, this quarter has been very positive for both SANDAG, the Commission, and SR 125. Starting with the Commission, you know that we have 3 levels of debt: the senior level, subordinate level, and the junior level. AAA rated at the senior level. We have our bands, which is the short-term bond anticipation notes, and the commercial paper on the second level. They rated it at AA. And just this last month, S&P and Fitch do what they call the annual surveillance. They come and kind of kick the tires and see how we're doing. And what they did is they actually upgraded our third union, which is where our TIFIA sits, from an A to an A plus. So that's really good for us, considering that we're looking to draw down on the TIFIA loan in a couple of years from now once the Mid-Coast project is complete. On the SR 125 front, also positive. You know, we bought the toll road back in December of 2011. It was rated B- at the time. We've gradually got increases, and just last month, Fitch actually did their annual surveillance, and they took us from an A- to an A, which also is a positive for current bondholders. Lastly, what really happened for SANDAG is the first time we went out and we borrowed money on SANDAG's credit, and that was for the Mid-Coast project. If you recall, during my last meeting here with you, we kind of talked about the funding that we're going to do for the GANs, the grant anticipation notes. It was a single barrel securitization, meaning that we did not borrow from the Commission's credit, strictly on SANDAG. We're a little bit concerned about how the market would perceive this, considering that this hadn't been done in the market for over 15 years. We were very pleasantly surprised when we went out to the market that we were 10 times oversubscribed, meaning that we had $331 million in bonds for sale. We actually got orders of $3 billion. So based on that, we're able to reduce interest rates, and ultimately we got a rate under 2%. In fact, it looked like pricing was about 10 basis points away from a AAA rated level. So we actually priced as a AA, although we've been given an A- rating from S&P. So overall, we're very pleased with that transaction. Just looking at our overall portfolio as it stands today, our coverage remains strong. It's almost 3 times, which is like 2.98 to be exact. That's because our sales tax has come in a little bit higher than we've anticipated, and so overall our portfolio is in a good place. One of the things that we're looking at currently, because interest rates are so depressed, the 30-year Treasury is just trading above 2%. It was 193 last week. There's a potential for us to refund some of our tax-exempt paper on a taxable basis. There's some disadvantage of doing that, because if you do that, it's really difficult to go back to the market in future years and refund again. As you know, back in 2017, there was a Tax Reform Act that you can't do advance refundings on a tax-exempt basis, but you can do it on a taxable basis. So currently, if you look at our portfolio, there's potentially about $100 million in present value savings if we do that. So we're looking very closely with PFM, our financial advisors, to see if it really makes sense. Maybe the 2012s, which are the most close coming to a refundable, may make sense. The 2014s and 2016s also pencil out, but we may potentially look at just doing the 2012. So we'll probably come back to you next month if that's something that we're going to take a closer look at. So that's kind of my market update before I hand it over to Jim, if you have any questions on it. So I'll let Jim take it over and talk about the economy.
Yeah. Before I get started, I just want to introduce a new colleague over there against the wall. Stephanie gives a little wave. She'll be presenting this quarterly economic update to you for the in the future. I'll be stepping away. You're in good hands. She's an experienced international and modeling economist, and we are very lucky to have her. But I'm happy to be here today to talk about some storm clouds on the horizon a little bit. As Andre mentioned, the equities markets, the stock market has been pretty erratic over the last 6 months, a year. It's actually up about 1,000 points from just when we did this slide about a week and a half ago. So that should tell you a little something. Just the other day I was asked to prepare some talking points and advice for investors, and my advice was just hold on, close your eyes and think long term. You can see that real GDP growth on the upper right there has fallen over the last couple quarters. Slow growth is not no growth, so we're not in a recession, and we're not necessarily imminently headed for a recession, but as Andre did mention, there are warning signs on the horizon. The inverted yield curve is not a cause of a recession, but it's an indicator of a recession. It's an indicator of how investors are feeling, short versus long term. So in response to that, the Fed cut their rates, as Andre mentioned, for the first time in quite a long time. They're still very, very low. You can see the target is between 2 and 2.25% right now. They might cut rates again. The president just asked them to cut them to below 0. I doubt they'll do that, but they might cut another quarter point, as Andre mentioned. And one of the reasons they're doing that is inflation is still below their target rate of 2%. Last summer we had a fairly vigorous little spurt of inflation at 2.9. This summer it was down to 1.8, so we're not seeing a lot of inflation, and that is the big worry for the Fed. Unemployment-wise, we are still at a very, very good place here in San Diego. It's ticked up a bit, but I wouldn't put too much into that. You can see that the U.S. and California are still about where they were last year, very close to what we call full employment. Amazon has 30,000 open jobs right now, for an example. There are a lot of jobs available. We're seeing some slower growth in the number of jobs, the number of employed people. But that, I think, is more a reflection of where we are in the job market, where it's very difficult for companies to find employees. And because of that, and on the upper right there, you see that real wages are going up. Those are real wages, wages in excess of inflation, going up about 1% over the last year, which is a pretty good number. And what one would expect to see with the labor market as tight as we've had for the last few years, and it's very good news for us. Another piece of pretty good news is that housing prices really haven't risen here in San Diego over the last year. The median home price is about $580,000. That's not unalloyed good news, because our permits, the amount of housing that's being built right now, is very sluggish. You'd expect to see a lot more housing being built. One kind of thought in the first part of this year, bad weather was holding back construction and permits weren't coming in, but we're just not seeing a rise in permits. And for us to get out of the housing crisis wherein we really need to build a lot more housing. Transnet revenues, you can see here, the FY19 number is a little bit speculative. We don't have 100% certainty on what our exact numbers are because of some software issues at the state, but we have seen fairly robust growth in our Transnet revenues over the last couple of years. But again, with those storm clouds kind of massing on the horizon, it's not raining yet, and it may not actually rain, but we could see a slowing growth or even a dip of Transnet revenues over the next couple of years. And that's your update.
So, actually, 2 questions. First, the wage data, Jim, is that local or is that national?
That is local.
That is local.
So you're seeing some local growth in wages, again, over inflation rate, which is encouraging and what we would hope to see, and bodes well for our Transnet revenues, at least in the short term.
And given the sort of the major job centers and whatnot, if there were nationally something of a mild recession, is there a way to generalize as the extent to which we as a region would tend to see more or less impact given the specific major employers in our region?
That is an excellent question, and San Diego is blessed with what I like to call kind of a recession-resilient economy. We are not an economy that places all of its eggs in one or two baskets. Our economy is very diverse. We've done some research, and no more than 15% of our economy is in one particular sector. We have a pretty big high-tech sector, a pretty big tourism sector. We have the military here, which drives a lot of what we do. But we're not a Navy town anymore. We're not a fishing town anymore. And we're not even really a biotech town anymore. And the biotech sector is still going gangbusters, by the way. They're raising a lot of venture capital. So that's not one that in the very short term we have a lot of worries about. So I would say that generally speaking, we're in a pretty beneficial position to suffer less than other towns might, especially when you talk about the Great Recession. It hit San Diego probably a little less hard than it hit other places that were more focused on things like housing development. Places like in the Sun Belt that were building tons of housing, and a lot of their economic activity was based on that. We were building a lot of housing, and we do need to be building more, but it wasn't a situation where we were hit harder. What could hit us specifically hard? Maybe if the life sciences sector was really hit hard, I could see that impacting us worse, but I don't think that's very likely. Our health services in the long term seems to be a very healthy and growing economy. Obviously in military, something could happen with the military, but they've tended to be pivoting towards San Diego rather than away, consolidating activity here in San Diego, moving more ships here. So we're expecting more military personnel here, not less. But of course, during the base realignment closures in the early 90s, that was one that hit San Diego harder. But since then, our economy has diversified even more, so we would be even less likely to do that. The only thing that I would even remotely think about the military moving away would be the NAVWAR facility up by Old Town on Route 5. It's a dilapidated old building, and we're looking to work with the Navy to redevelop that. But if the Navy couldn't find a partner to redevelop that parcel and get the kind of office space they need out of that, they might move their 5,000 employees who are there somewhere else. I don't think that's a very likely possibility, but that's about the only type of thing. Sorry to be long-winded.
No, that's great. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Questions for Jim? Thank you very much. Good presentation. Appreciate the information. Thank you. So let's see. We didn't have any original public comments, so we don't need any continued public comments. So upcoming meeting, we have the regular meeting October 9th, and we're going to have a special meeting next week. It looks like. Anything else before we adjourn? Yeah. Well, that's not. Yeah. So I guess the one quick thing it goes on. So we're gonna the information will go to the other members that are absent. We don't know if they can or can't make it, but we did make sure they get.
You just want to make sure you have a quorum.
Yeah, it sounds like we do with people here, but we also, clearly they need to be invited. Whether their schedule works or not. Yeah. Okay. All right. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Good job.
Good job.